our repayments on our national debt, even with interest rates on the floor, is already bigger.
He's been maxing out the credit card, George Osborne?
Totally, yes, absolutely.
Wow.
And that's why there's growth. I'm pleased there's growth in the economy, but at some point in time, unless we get a grip of this, we're leaving our children and grandchildren with a real toxic legacy.
With all the tough decisions that have had to have been made?
Well, when you say tough decisions, I think there are some very tough decisions we could make on foreign aid and many other aspects like that, but they're not prepared to do it.
In terms of, and I'm sure my friend from the FSB would echo this, is that small business owners, and I spend a lot of time sitting in front of SME business owners talking about what's going on, and they're saying, how do we plan with a lack of certainty in terms of our membership of the EU? Only the Conservatives are guaranteeing a referendum. Why won't you and the other parties also guarantee a referendum whether we should be in or out?
I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll maybe refocus on that in a few moments. But I want to bring in a caller, Jan in Bedfordshire. But what I will get Nigel Farage to do is answer your question. Was it Fiona's question back there in the back row? Remind us what your question was again. A quick answer to this. I'm sure you've been asked it before and answered it before, but let's hear it. Question?
Yes, what will happen to UKIP if the British public votes to stay in the EU?
Well, I passionately hope the British public
doesn't. Wither on the vine?
But the answer is the SNP lost a referendum, and look what's happened to them. But I'm not in this for party interest. I'm in this because I want my country to be a free, independent democracy.
Jan in Bedfordshire. Good morning, Jan.
Good morning. Now, this might not be the most burning political question of the day, so I'm grateful to be able to ask it. Mr Farage, I would love to vote UKIP because I wholeheartedly support the majority of your policies, but I've read on a social media site that if UKIP are successful, you're going to repeal the ban on fox hunting, and I'm afraid I could never vote for any party that would repeal a ban on something so abhorrent. I'm wondering if you could reassure me that this won't be the case.
We have no party policy on fox hunting, and certainly UKIP MPs in Parliament would not be whipped, whether it was hunting or abortion or any of these issues. They should be decided by conscience. If you look at our manifesto, you will see no commitment to repealing the fox hunting ban.
I'm most grateful for that. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
We have got some stuff on the Facebook page coming in, and we have got Andy. What is your plan for reducing the national debt without battering the poor? That's an interesting addendum to that. Before we hear from Nigel Farage, reducing the national debt without battering the poor, that's Andy's question. Any thoughts, quick thoughts from our audience before we... sorry, who was that?
Just thinking,
Mark, very quickly, on that point.
By cutting foreign aid, withdrawing from the EU, HS2, for me, those will create a tremendous amount of finance to play with.
I guy right at the back behind with the glasses, yeah. I thought you wanted... always look behind him. I thought you wanted to say something.
Oh, yeah. I wanted to say about helping the disabled with getting their benefits without being discriminated on as they are at the moment.
All right, let's...
And get back to work.
Let's talk about... Oh, and Kojo, yeah, go on.
Productivity of UK workers. Way behind the OECD average. So more in education, getting a better skilled workforce.
Right. Government spending is currently £718 billion per annum, right? So you'd save £8 billion by leaving the EU, and by cutting foreign aid, £9 billion.
Our current net EU contribution is about 9-point-something billion, but going up every year. We would cut £10 billion a year. By the end of this Parliament, we would cut £11 billion a year from the foreign aid budget, over £10 billion a year from the EU contributions, which are wholly unnecessary to do business, but I trust we're going to come back to that. HS2, which is a vanity project that would benefit very, very few people, we can save £4 billion a year on, and a recalculation of the Barnett formula so that English and Welsh taxpayers get a rather better deal would, by the end of this Parliament, save us £5 billion a year. We have put on the table...
These are drops in the ocean, though, in the great scheme of things,
No, this is mega. This is big stuff. I'm talking about £32 billion a year of cuts without touching a single frontline service. The other parties have... I mean, frankly, I asked Ed Miliband that question last night, and he talked about tiddly little cuts to private pension contributions. We're the only party that has put an honest contribution into this debate. And can I just add, Nikki, the other thing we want to do is we genuinely believe that if you give people tax cuts, that leads to dynamic growth within the economy. So I think we're the one party with a credible plan on this.
Yeah, I think it's... I thought, Barbara, you wanted to come in. Guy there in the middle with the jumper, yeah.
Yeah, you say you're going to save billions by leaving the EU. How will you ensure that the losses to the economy aren't greater than the billions we're going to be saving due to companies no longer be able to freely trade within Europe?
Straight back to Ant there, another point.
So I'm an electronic engineer and I used to work in Italy and Switzerland, and if you think of economic growth and STEM as the main driver, surely leaving the EU already...
STEM?
Science, technology, engineering and mathematics. Already Poland's picking up a lot of the new jobs because of the uncertainty. So if that's the biggest economic driver, how do you see UKIP addressing that?
Do you know, the EU has trade deals, a variety of trade deals, with about 60 different countries in the world. And in fact, all over the world, what you've seen over the last 30 years is global trade liberalisation. The old tariffs that used to exist back in the 50s and 60s have virtually gone. We are part of the EU. We are banned from making our own trade deals with other parts of the world, whereas countries like Switzerland and even tiny little Iceland go out and negotiate. And just bear this point.
That's not the feeling in Switzerland.
Just bear this point. Well, the Swiss are rather rich, so you know.
Yeah, but they resent. I felt resented by some factions of Swiss society as an immigrant there, even as a high-skilled immigrant, in the same level that immigrants are resented here.
I think that's a slightly separate question. You know, what we're talking about here is trade. All right. We do not need to be members of political union in order to buy and sell goods from each other. It isn't governments that make business, it's consumers that choose to buy a product at the right price. I was in Grimsby 2 weeks ago and I watched a big ship come in and unload 3,000 Audis. And there they were, on the dockside, going off to dealerships in the Midlands and the north of England. Later that day, that vessel was loaded up with cars that had been manufactured in the UK to go to Rotterdam. Some of them for sale in the European market, but increasingly we now sell more cars outside the EU to India and China. All right, so that's good. That is trade happening. The United Kingdom is now the Eurozone's biggest export market in the world. They need us to have that trade deal far more than we need them. And Digby Jones, who was a trade minister under the last Labour government, Digby Jones said you could negotiate a trade deal with the EU within 24 hours. The German car industry would demand nothing less. So trade and politics are different things.
We got a caller. Who was the caller again we had? John in North Wales. We'll come back to the deficit and the money and the sums in just a second. John in North Wales, good morning. What's your point?
Good morning, Nikki. Good morning, Mr Farage. My question is, basically, I'm a dairy farmer. We operate under the Common Agricultural Policy. Basically, all food that is consumed, or most of the food that is consumed in Britain, is all subsidised. We could not function without that subsidy, particularly in the dairy industry at the moment. We would be out of business. Now, if we come out of Europe, what does Mr Farage propose to put in place to replace that subsidy? Because we will have other European food, which is available for the multi-retailers to go out and bring over to this country, which is subsidised. So what is his proposals on that?
We have a Norfolk farmer from a big family of farmers who is our agriculture spokesman and helped us draft our policy. And I accept the premise of the argument that you've made, that without a degree of subsidy, we would see rural dereliction in many parts of this country, which is the last thing any of us want to see. So we would maintain the concept of the single farm payment, but, and here's the but, with a taper for the larger farms. So anything over 1,500 hectares would not pro rata get as much money. So some of the giant agri-businesses might not like us, but for small dairy farmers, things would stay as they are.
Let's get the response.
And I would add that, of course, under the CAP, we also have the CFP and the Common Fisheries Policy, and we want to take back our territorial waters like Norway, and that would bring many, many thousands of jobs back.
Transitional arrangement, how would that be paid for?
Well, it's paid for out of taxation, just as it currently is. At the moment, we pay the EU £20 billion a year, roughly, OK? And 10 billion of it comes back, and it comes back in the form of agricultural support. It comes back in part funding of a variety of projects. So that's how it's calculated.
Let's get our dairy farmer back. Sorry, John. Go on, John.
Yes. The other point that worries me really is that basically two of the largest dairy companies in this country now are European-owned. Most of the abattoirs in this country are Irish-owned. We are very much integrated with these European companies. You know, what's going to be their attitude if we pull out?
Let's throw it around that, pulling out. Let's get a couple of comments from our audience too on the implications there. Put your hand up. Yeah, go on.
Well, I think as Nigel said previously, you don't necessarily need to be in political union with countries for their businesses to operate there. If they're doing good business, then surely they wouldn't just pull out if Britain were to leave the EU.
Right behind you, yeah.
I think it would be a major mistake to pull out of the EU because the companies, large corporates particularly, are usually integrated with Europe, and businesses are done between European companies versus US companies.
Okay, Laura, I'll get a question for you in just a moment, but I want to hear from Bob, who has called. Where are you calling from, Bob?
Worcestershire, good, Nicky.
Hi there. It's all yours.
Hello. Nigel, good morning. What I'd like to put to you is as a serving firefighter, and over the last few years, we've had our pensions damaged. We are now so far to the bone. We're looking from riding from 5 to 4 firefighters on an appliance. What would you say to prospective voter, to the emergency services, to my fire service? How would you see where we're going to go forward in the future, and to allow us to give the work we need to give to the public that they demand from us that we can't give at the moment?
Yeah, I think in a way, the government has gone for some fairly easy hits. It's gone for hits on the police, and it's gone for hits on the fire service, knowing what a decent, law-abiding bunch of people you are.
So you'll protect the police and you'll protect the fire service.
Yeah, I think we've got to. I think otherwise...
Because I'm just looking, I'm leaving the EU, scrapping HS2, if you want to balance the budget by 2017 to 2018, and you're cutting foreign aid, there's still tens of millions of cuts still to be explained.
Bear in mind that for the first time in the history of politics in this country, UKIP's manifesto was sent out to an independent think tank who have verified and audited our figures.
So, for those who haven't read it, where will the cuts be focused on in terms of public services?
I've given you £32 billion worth of cuts already in this programme, but there are other savings we can see. Departmental savings in Whitehall, rationalisation
Rationalisation?
Well, there are 43 current police areas in this country.
Right.
We think they could be rationalised and some quite big savings to be made.
Aren't we back to what you accused Ed Miliband of now? These are drops of rainfall in the ocean.
I have put £32 billion a year of cut savings on the table. Nobody else has come anywhere near it.
Would that be invested into the fire service?
Yeah, go on.
Would that be invested into things like the fire service, the police, and so on and so forth?
Yeah, how will this rationalisation of the police work?
Well, there are 43 areas.
There's one in Scotland.
Yeah, I accept that. But we have an awful lot of police areas. If you put them into bigger units, there are economies of scale to be found. Similarly with the health service.
How many units?
Similarly with the health service, we have had a 48% growth in middle management in the National Health Service since 1997. There are other savings that can be made.
How many units would you push the police into in England?
I haven't proposed a number, but I've said let's look at it. Let's try and rationalise it in time.
What would work, do you think? Did you say it's 43 at the moment, did you? Yeah. What would work, do you think?
Well, I'm not putting I'm just saying, let's look at it, let's try and deal with it.
Have you looked at it at all? Have you discussed it with your colleagues?
No, we want massive departmental savings, and in fact also within Whitehall there are several departments that we would like to see go.
Policemen and women listening would be quite interested to know the broad area. Are we talking about 4 units? Are we talking about 15 units? Are we talking about 25 units?
We are putting this on the table for debate over the next 5 years.
Can I just go back to something